Silicon Valley people, the big tech companies, the social media companies, and even the media companies. And I'm going to release the Kraken.
Apparently the U.S. Army raided Germany, okay, where the servers are for the election fraud. You know how they've been saying the Dominican servers or whatever was messing with it. Supposedly the U.S. Army just went to a foreign country and raided their businesses and shit like that, their servers or whatever, to see if there was election fraud or some shit like that.
Basically, what most Americans don't understand is that voting is done by private companies. The elections are conducted by private companies under contract from the county. And we went in and started looking at these private companies and their software and their security, and we realized, first off, there are no security standards. So there are no national standards that any voting company needs to meet as far as the security on their software. And as a result of that, we then began to look and we realized how easy it is to change votes. The software is so bad you can easily change the audit trail so that later you cannot even forensically go back and find out the votes that were changed. And that led us to a number of areas. One, we said, well, what happens to your vote after whatever the voting company locally does to it? What happens to it? Well, it turns out in the case of Texas and 28 other states, it all goes to a server in Frankfurt, Germany, which is owned by Barcelona, Spain multinational, and that's who actually controls and reports your vote.
I got to jump in. So here in Texas, if you vote early, and so your vote is being stored, you think, safely somewhere, the data about all the votes in Texas and 27 other states, the early voting data is actually being held in a server in Germany.
That is correct. And not only that, but in their process, and by a company called SCYTL, and in their process, we can even see malware sitting there collecting all the credentials of all the county workers everywhere who are submitting information up, which means you can now go back into the county and change votes there too. So you don't just change it in Frankfurt, you can go back and even change it here. And the software is just that bad, and it is that insecure that someone with a reasonable knowledge of hacking could absolutely go in and change it. And we're seeing now the issue you were talking about with all the vote harvesting and absentee and early voting and mail-in voting. We're seeing what happens when software that is that bad gets out.
Okay, folks, we got breaking news. According to Alpha Omega Energy at AOE Coin, they've put down this information. If it's true, it's another nail in the coffin. People on the ground in Germany report that SCYTL, I'm thinking SCYTL, hosting your elections data improperly through Spain was raided by a large U.S. Army force and their servers were seized in Frankfurt. SCYTL bankrupt report in any further details you find in AOE. So this is some information. It's in German, innovating democracy. So this is a thread on Twitter. So it says U.S. Army, something gross is coming. The Spanish software company SCYTL, which sells election manipulation software worldwide that was used in the USA, is on the verge of Frankfurt. I guess that's bankrupt. The server for the manipulation was in Germany, a rogue who thinks evil. Tonight, the U.S. Army confiscated the servers with a huge mobilization. Vulcan Capital funded SCYTL $40 million and made by Bill Gates and Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, who's dead. Vulcan Capital was formed in 2003 and is headquartered in Seattle with a second office in Palo Alto. Billions Fund, SCYTL, owns the servers that Dominion uses to store your voter fraud data. Instead of storing it in the United States, where there was plenty of secure space, companies loyal to America, they deliberately held it overseas in George Soros's domain and with activists and criminals paid by him. You can see their investment on the website here, and there's a website that you can go to. You can also use Google Translate to translate it. It's a legitimate website. A bunch of people has retweeted this stuff like crazy. The U.S. government already had servers seized in Germany in July, which was hosting data stolen by USA police files, WikiLeaks style, and other hacked government agency information and files, dubbed Blue Links. It comes from more than 200 agencies and includes hashtag Save the Children information. There's the AP News. Germany sieges server hosting pilfered U.S. police files. This is real news, folks.
Give up. But SCYTL, that's a place where all of this information was cycling through. Not supposed to, but it was. And actually there was a German, as I was told, there was a tweet in German from Germany that the U.S. Army had gone in and seized the SCYTL server. They're going through bankruptcy right now. So there's all kinds of games being played, and I had suggested that the president might get information from SCYTL, and the next day before, and I sent him specifics that he needed to get that would show a lot of fraud. And the next day before that information could be gotten, somebody ordered the U.S. Army, according to the tweet, to go in and seize the server. There are people involved inside the government that have been trying to take this president down, State Department, Intel community, and FBI, and all.
Do you have any evidence at all of widespread fraud? I've spoken with Republican secretaries of state in Georgia, in Arizona. I've spoken to Republican officials across the country. They have come up with zero evidence of widespread fraud.
And that is not true. That is absolutely not true. People have signed legal documents, affidavits stating that they saw illegal activities, and that is why we need to have this conversation in court. So, George, I don't know how widespread it is. I don't know if it'll change the outcome of the election. But why is everybody so scared just to have a fair election and find out?
I told George about the fact that we live in a republic, and the government gets its power from the consent of the governed. The governed are the people, and we give that consent on election day. And that is why we need to trust the process and the results of our elections to ensure that we get the right leaders in the White House, and especially for the next 4 years.
By the way, Big Tech has been giving your party in South Dakota a hard time. Can you tell us about that?
They have. Actually, yesterday, Twitter blocked the South Dakota Republican Party account, which was pretty shocking for us. And so we drew some attention to it, and they did unblock it, although we're still having difficulties going forward. And this is the kind of censorship that we've seen be pretty widespread the last year or two, and one of the reasons why big tech needs to have more oversight, potentially need to be broken up, and that Congress needs to act to make sure that they aren't manipulating an agenda through what they filter and allow the public to see and what they don't allow the public to see. And that's why we'll draw attention to it. That's why I talk about it, and why I focused on making sure that the South Dakota Republican Party wasn't treated differently than any other political organization that we may have here in the state and across the country.
Action between a United States person and a communist Chinese military company will be outlawed. A U.S. university professor pleaded guilty for sharing federally funded medical research with China. The professor is linked to pro-Beijing Chinese groups in the U.S.
A university professor is pleading guilty to illegally using federal funding to help China enhance its biomedical research. He faces up to 5 years in prison. That's according to the Justice Department. Song Guozheng was a professor of internal medicine at Ohio State University. When he applied for $4 million in grants from the taxpayer-funded National Institute of Health, Zheng did not disclose his employment with the Chinese university. Zheng is part of China's so-called Thousand Talents program. Through the talent recruitment project, China hires top U.S. scientists from universities and biotech firms to teach in Chinese universities or work in Chinese labs. Many of them, like Zheng, receive U.S. federal funding for their research. A Chinese state media report shows that the professor also held multiple positions in pro-Beijing Chinese groups in California when he was working as a professor at the University of Southern California. That includes the vice president of Chinese American Federation and the chairman of the Association of Chinese Scholars and Students from the Chinese province of Anhui. When the latter group was established in 2011, the Chinese State Council published a press release to announce it. According to the DOJ, Zheng was arrested in May in Alaska when he was about to board a charter flight and flee to China. That's after he learned that his American employer is investigating him. Penny Zhou, NTV News.
American thought leaders interviewed General Robert Spalding, where he spoke about the impact the Chinese Communist Party has on America. He said the entire premise of 2020 has been about the Chinese Communist Party.
Robert Spalding, a retired Air Force Brigadier General and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, said this entire year has been dominated by the actions of the Chinese Communist Party because 2020 has really been about the coronavirus. He said that the CCP enabled the spread of the virus through international air travel when they blocked domestic air travel within China. He said the CCP locked down PPE masks around the world, put pressure on the World Health Organization to not talk about human-to-human transmission, encouraged panic on social media, and spread disinformation that the virus originated from the United States and Spain.
What does it have to do with the CCP? Why did we have massive mail-in ballots? Because of the coronavirus. Why do we have the coronavirus? Because of the Chinese Communist Party. When you add all of these things together, the actions by the Chinese Communist Party deliberately impacted the U.S. election.
He went on to say that the actions of the CCP promoted a narrative that the U.S. wasn't handling the pandemic well compared to China. putting the blame on President Trump rather than on the CCP, who was responsible for spreading it to the United States. According to Spalding, the cultural, political, and academic landscape with things like critical race theory and social justice programs mirrors that of the oppressive communist regime in China.
We are, in 2020, in the midst of a people's war waged by the Chinese Communist Party around the world to essentially destroy liberalism. And in many ways, we're cooperating because we censor ourselves. I could look at the United States and see many of the same things that were happening in China. In other words, widespread censorship, widespread oppression of views. In other words, there's only one truth, and that's the truth of the Chinese Communist Party issues. And if you have another opinion, then you're isolated.
Spalding said that the intelligence community and journalists may dispute the party's impact on the world because there's no hard paper trail. But he said the CCP is one of the most secretive organizations in the world that would never telegraph what they were doing unless there was a major crisis in the country. According to him, knowing how the CCP operates, the link between the regime and 2020 is very clear. Unlike American legacy media and other countries, Russia and China have not yet congratulated Joe Biden for being named president-elect by the media.
They both understand that in America, you still have rule of law. And they saw in 2000 that there was a disputed election for 37 days. Somebody was promoted as the president-elect, and then on the 37th day, we had somebody else.
Spalding said that he thinks China and Russia are hedging their bets and waiting for the results to play out. Christina Kim, NTD News.
You ready?